Hey everyone, I'm excited to introduce to you Lesley Chen Young, who is a colleague of mine at LinkedIn. We were actually connected to Alex Rado, who's on my team in the learning solutions. She does many cool things. She has an amazing podcast called Seeds about personal finance and wealth. And she also started her own company called Commonwealth Coaching, and she's on the Talent Insights team at LinkedIn. Welcome, Lesley. Nice to have you.
Thanks, Davidson. So excited to be here on your show.
Yeah. I had a really good conversation with Liam, and I love how passionate you are. Like clearly from reading your LinkedIn profile, you can tell that you're very passionate and very talented too. Might I add, had a lot of.
Oh, you're way too kind, Davidson. I think the passion is the bigger driver there, and I'm lucky to be surrounded by folks that feel similarly like yourself.
Yeah, and I really like I started getting into personal finance because honestly, like my family, um, being a refugee from my parents were refugees from Vietnam.
Mm,
A lot of times they were in survival mode, right? So we never have bought a house before. They never saved up anything. Like as soon as we were living paycheck to paycheck most of my life. So
mhm.
growing up, I guess I didn't have the best like people to model after, in my parents. But, I think my curiosity has led me to listening to so many amazing podcasts. And yeah, when I found out about your podcast, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like there's not many people doing what you're doing for, especially for your audience as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I feel like your experience, your family's experiences, while of course absolutely unique to you, are similar to that of, for example, my family's experiences. I think the immigrant story, at least for me, with my family coming from Jamaica and being first generation American here, it doesn't stop at the generation that migrates. It doesn't stop at the generation that's born in the new country. It continues, and that is a huge motivator, Davidson, for me to try to help dispel a lot of the personal finance fears and anxiety among people, and especially among people that might be first generation wealth builders. So can totally relate, and I'm just so excited to find like-minded people who want to take that background and still turn that into something successful here in the US.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people that I think one of the advantages of being, a first generation and I do think like we tend to be like very hardworking.
Yeah.
Because I didn't grow up, with a lot of wealth. I often find myself like being very resilient and very, um, I'm usually like I think I've because of my work ethic, it's got me this far, but I do think there's more to it to being successful than just having a strong work ethic.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Certainly. Yeah, no, it's interesting, right? Because I don't know if your parents might jokingly say this, but I know mine are jokingly like, "Oh, you only have three jobs? I mean, you should have five by now." It's like this this idea is ingrained at a very early age that working hard is the expectation, and being spectacular at what you do is the expectation. I think in a lot of ways it has served me growing up, and then in a lot of ways it also are things that I'm working through. So yeah, that work ethic, I think when you meet a fellow immigrant or descendant of immigrant household, you can immediately kind of pick that up.
Yeah, it's cool because like America itself, like we often forget that we all are immigrants, right? Like minus
Yeah.
Native Americans, but that's such a small population of the US right now. And we forget that, at some point like our ancestors are immigrants, right? So it's interesting how, especially with what's going on right now, with there's a lot of racial tension in the world. But
Hmm.
I think I'm happy that the world's like finally doing something about it, right? Instead of just pretending like this doesn't exist.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's been I it, to say it's been a heartbreaker of the past couple of weeks and months, I think would be an understatement. Just
Mm.
speaking as a Black woman in the U.S., particularly as we're recording this podcast, another video has gone viral of violence against Black bodies, and I would say I am that hopeful optimist, just to be completely honest about being excited that there does seem to be a momentum of change. And I know too that as I speak to other older Black mentors in the States, they're kind of saying, yeah, we've heard this song before, we've seen this play out before, let's see if this is really going to enact change. So I think, at least for me, Davidson, I am feeling hopeful. I'm feeling like there is something that we can do to be able to kind of turn that around for folks. But just curious to see that work really, hit the pavement and put our money where our mouth is, especially as young, bright, working young professionals in the U.S. I think we have a lot of that power to make change.
Yeah, yeah. I am optimistic as well because although this has come up a few different times, I think in a weird way, like the COVID situation has helped people actually spend more time with it. Because I think naturally, normally we're just too busy commuting to work and doing all these things. Like, there's less attention. Like people are just like, well, I just need to worry about like paying the bills. But I think
Mhm.
because people have a little bit more downtime, they can be a bit more introspective and be like, well, where are ways where I haven't been the best ally? Just
Mhm.
more space to think and ultimately, hopefully, thinking creates change.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think I I I agree with you that I think the pandemic has really has made it so that there's a lot less noise, for a lot of us, and it also has made it so that when these things do come up, you'll find that people that would generally care but not really have the agency or the time, or it's hard to say time, right? Because we choose what we do with our time, but who would otherwise be occupied with other things now have the ability to really zone in and think about the experience of Black folks in America and what it feels like to kind of wake up and be thinking about a topic and not be able to get that out of your head as you log into work and as you cook dinner and as you go to sleep, and you're just seeing this video played over and over. It is a moment of solidarity that I can't be grateful for a pandemic, but I am grateful for those that have really stepped up in this situation and have become more than just like passive, quasi allies to truly anti-racists in my community. And
Mm.
I know that there's so much to unpack there. I can't pretend to be an expert on race relations by any means, but I can only speak from experience as a Black woman in the past couple of months, and I can see a lot more of that activation, Davidson. So I'd have to agree with you there.
Yeah, and I think this also ties into why I'm sure you started Commonwealth coaching, right? Because I do think the underrepresented communities do need a lot of support, and there's less of resources out there, right? I think if you come from wealth, naturally, like your parents teach you a lot of these things, but at least for me, like I knew none of this. Like I had to figure it out on my own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're 100% correct, and it's not even. I mean, you can talk about the immigrant story. You can talk about, just what our education system in the U.S. prepares you for, and both don't prepare you to manage your money in a way that actually enables and empowers you, which is such a shame, a missed opportunity, and especially, as someone who wants to be able to build wealth, not just for my nuclear family, but for my large extended family, as someone who wants to be able to have that, cross-continental continuous relationships as I continue to grow up and as I have kids of my own. It's so important. And I realized I was actually quite scared, to be honest, but I realized that if I didn't get this right, if I didn't know how to apply all of the, book smarts that I had acquired through my years of studying in the US, if I didn't know how to channel that into how to actually make that grow in wealth for me, and I would be doing my family, I'd be doing kind of my name a disservice. So you're 100% right. The genesis of Commonwealth coaching was purely born out of a personal fear of, why is this so hard to crack? And given that it's something that everyone has to do, I think I can get at it, and I think I can be good at it. And it's crazy. I mean, the imposter syndrome at the beginning was so real. Obviously, I'm a young Black woman in my 20s that works in a tech company. What the hell do I have to do with personal finance? But in a way, it was exactly that story that shows that you don't have to be on Wall Street or working for one of the top financial services companies to know and navigate your wealth journey in a way that suits you and the way that empowers you. So, yeah, no, Commonwealth coaching has been an absolute dream. I could not have anticipated almost 2.5 years later that I'd be, managing a full small business on the side.
Yeah, I mean, that's really inspiring because I do think, a lot of people are almost paralyzed by the fear of imposter syndrome, right? And I'm sure you've had your fair share of struggles and like you said, like you're often the only young millennial Black female, right, in a lot of
Mhm.
these situations, especially in the world of like finance too and wealth generation. It's not to generalize, but living in New York City, I at one point I was partnering with hedge funds, private equity, and
Mhm.
financial services in general. And it's safe to say that there were a lot of middle-aged white men who graduated from Harvard Business School and or Yale, and there was definitely some common themes I've noticed.
Yeah.
I felt so out of place. Like a lot of times I would be sitting in a boardroom with them, trying to pitch my product, and I just felt so out of place.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's so like pervasive, right? I mean, you felt it. I mean, neither of us are that straight white male, and no shade whatsoever if that happens to be your demographic. But in so many of these corporate spaces, if you don't have that race or that family background, you immediately feel like an outsider. And although I wasn't, in your shoes, on the pitching side, even with Commonwealth coaching, I've been seeking out mentors and have been exploring or dipping my toe in what it looks like to potentially look to the VC space for our next phase of the business. And countless mentors have told me, Lesley, no, don't even bother going to VC. They're not going to get you as a Black woman. You might as well just go for social impact. Go for
Wow.
people who like care about making a difference. And
Hmm.
I have to say, Davidson, it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand it's like, yeah, what I'm doing actually does have that triple bottom line. it's
Hmm.
it's it's people, profit, and planet, but on the other hand, I'm thinking to myself, well, dang, I mean, I really think that the business that I'm building should be a competitor and near peer of all the other businesses going through VC that are only judged on profit and only judged on operational excellence. And I just wish that that the folks that are on the deciding decision table in those rooms would really be able to see that. But it's another reason why representation is, albeit it's kind of corny to say it, but representation really does matter so much. So yeah, being
Hmm.
the only one in those spaces, it definitely gives you something to remember about as you're falling asleep and agonize over.
Yeah. Oh man, so much there you just said. Um, yeah, it is interesting too, right? Because like when I do listen to my podcasts, like all the best podcasters I know, like I can just open up my podcast app now, right? And within personal finance, I look at, like all these people, and I'm like, huh, they all look a certain way, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, have you ever listened to the We Study Billionaires podcast?
I don't think I have, Davidson. Should I add that to my list?
You should. That was the one that got me really into this space, and then Planet Money
Oh,
I really enjoyed as well.
you said Planet Money, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's a classic. But We Study Billionaires. I'm adding that to my Spotify podcasts right now.
And then Money for the Rest of Us is another one that really got me interested into this.
Nice. Okay.
Um, but yeah, no, I do. It's interesting because even within the podcast space, like I do see there's a lack of diversity, right? Anything media related, like that.
Mhm.
So happy, like when I heard about your podcast, and I'm always like, yes, like we have that.
Yes, yes, 100%. The representation is important, and especially when you think about the thing that matters most to me, which transparently is within the finance world. Helping people to identify that confidence and that pathway forward. It is really hard to build confidence and a path atop a rocky foundation of feeling like you don't belong, or feeling like you're doomed from the start, or feeling like you're not supposed to be good, air quotes, on this. And so I feel pretty strongly that in using my story, maybe falling down a few times, finding success in other times, I hope that I can be someone that helps other people that might be classified as the underdog, or not the typical norm or average, to really find themselves in this space, because I think there's so much potential, not only just from a wealth generation standpoint, but also just in terms of finding that life that fulfills you. And I don't think we get enough of that education as we talk about the K through 12 system, even the college system in the US.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's a pretty big thing to tackle, right?
Yeah.
So
Small feet.
yeah, but I think it's so important. I mean, it's crazy how like even how to balance a checkbook, right? Like you don't all these super valuable skills, like they're not teaching people, and it's mind-boggling because it's like I remember going to college and being able to get approved for all these credit cards, and I was just like, I think obviously I was a bit naive back then, but I was just like knew nothing about interest rates, like APRs, like didn't I was just like, oh wow, like they approved me for like $10,000, and I was in college, like I had a job
Yep.
maybe like $100 a week, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I've made way too many mistakes, like even to the point where I almost filed for bankruptcy at one point. Like I was just so depressed and lost and confused. So, I think that's great what you're doing.
Yeah. No, and your story, Davidson, is so unfortunately common for so many people, and with something as small as those credit cards. I mean, it's like you near graduation of high school, and all of a sudden Discover is sending you like blank credit cards in the mail to your home address, and then you get to
Yeah.
school and it's the same thing. And this is something I actually routinely argue with my dad about, whom I love very dearly. But I truly think that in the credit card industry, especially in the US, that there is a little bit of a predatory aspect to what's happening, particularly with younger people, that you don't know what interest is, and you get kind of roped in by this 0% interest for the first
Mm,
18 months, and and all of these different kind of cashback or point systems that get you excited about the potential. But at the end of the day, the very basic understanding of what a credit card is not something that's required to be start to get involved in this space. And so the majority of my clients within CWC, I'd say about 50%, are working through some kind of debt. And a lot of folks are working through that credit card debt because it does tend to be that continuous, almost snowball down a huge mountain, where the interest is so high on these cards that it ends up just completely overcoming your life. So
Yep.
I am so sorry that you went through that experience, and I do hope that you found some, some guidance, or just were able to start finding your way out of it, because I can empathize with how just terrifying it is to be in that space.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like it was pretty scary, and they're like, luckily, like I've done a lot of work, and we just bought a house, so we're moving into to new construction, and I'm getting married, and
Oh, congratulations.
thank you. So just to say, I'm sharing with you all that just to say that, like, I'm in a good place now. It took me a while to really take responsibility and stop
Mhm.
the victim game, and stop blaming it on, oh, well, my dad didn't teach me anything, or my parents also went through bankruptcy, like I can't
Yeah.
world and how life's unfair, and all this stuff. At the end of the day, like it's up to me to just be thoughtful, and just educate myself, right? Whether it's through books and podcasts, and hiring a coach, like things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, Davidson, I know this is your show, but as a coach, I'm just so curious, like what helped you transition from that, as you put it in your own words, that victim mentality into kind of one that was more victorious.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I looked at the theme and if I looked, I'm like, okay, I'm borrowing money from my friends. Like, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. Like, I'm taking vacations, like, in college where, like, I shouldn't be, right? Because I don't have a full-time job yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think after a while, you start to like look at all these common trends, and you're like, huh, like, I'm like the common thread with all of this, right?
Right.
I think hiring a coach was like
Yeah, yeah,
the first thing that got me thinking, because the coach helped me like realize, like, hey, like, where else does this show up in your life? And I'm like, oh, okay. So I started taking responsibility. I mean, it took a while, right? I wouldn't say it was like a, it was a journey that was like a lot of ups and downs. So some days, like, I'd be like, oh man, like, I'm killing it, I'm making a lot of money, and then I'm like, but why am I still living paycheck to paycheck? You know? And then
right.
after like a lot of coaching, I realize, I'm like, huh, like, you're not willing to ask for help. Like, you're not willing to be transparent and speak with your partner about things. Like, you're trying to do everything on your own. Like, dude, like, you have a mom, like, you have a family, like, you should really ask for support. Like, don't try to do it alone. So for me, like, it was a combination of like getting support from a coach,
Mm-hmm.
communicating more effectively with my partner, so we're on the same page, and then also reading like books like Tony Robbins. He has a bunch of books that are really helpful, and then reading a lot of these personal finance books like helped me realize, like, oh, okay, like, it's not as bad as I think it is. And Ramit Sethi's book is amazing as well. Like, that really got me thinking a lot.
Yeah, yeah, no, such good gems there, and it's incredible. Like you said, I think there is often a thread, actually not even often, I would put behind my name that there is always a thread, of connectivity between weaknesses within managing your finances and other themes that show up in your life. And I'm so like excited for you and inspired by you, and being able to really recognize that, and do the work of learning and reading, and getting yourself from point A to point B. And it reminds me, within my clientele, I usually have my clients work on a accountability word of the year, meaning a word that is just outside of finance itself, but it really speaks to them, whether that be, progress over perfection, or spirituality, or whatever it may be, and start to weave that into what they do to get themselves from point A to point B on the finance front. It's so powerful. And Davidson, you're like a living legend of that. So congrats to you. I'm like smiling, cheesing from afar here in DC.
No, I appreciate the support. I think like what like just talking about it openly, I think sometimes we feel like we're like the only ones, right? I know for me, like I was like, no one could possibly like understand how I feel, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that's it. Like sometimes we think like, oh, like there's a lot of shame associated with like having debt, whether it's like student loans debt or even like just like sometimes even just borrowing from like your family, that like
Yeah.
have like our own stories about it. But you start to realize like, hey, like your family wants but what's best for you, right? Like it might
Mhm.
be comfortable that you're borrowing like 5,000 from your parents to help pay this like 20% interest like credit card debt, but they know that at
Mhm.
the end of the day, like, and obviously not everyone has that privilege, right? So I'm privileged that my mom helped me out once, but
Mhm.
think knowing that you're not alone and knowing that like people want to help you like alleviates like some of like that shame and that guilt associated with carrying like debt.
Definitely. I mean, I feel like you and my therapist would really get along, Davidson, because it's that feeling of isolation that is so it really rocks you regardless of what situation that you're in, and especially when we talk about finances on the debt side, and you just feel like, man, like what is wrong with me?
Mm,
Why did I get myself into this situation? And so much judgment is kind of pushed onto you and your character and you as a person. And the reality is that is just absolutely not the reason why people go into debt. They go into debt in some ways because they might be, under informed, but in many ways because they, wanted to pursue a higher education, and the cost of higher education in this country is astronomical. In many ways, they go into debt because the rate of growth in our incomes has not matched the rate of growth in the expenses it takes to live comfortably. In many ways, they go into debt because they haven't aligned themselves with a structure of spending less than what you make, and really living paycheck to paycheck, zeroing that out every month. And that's not a character flaw. That's just a structural change. You when you start to take on language internally that beats yourself down and makes you feel like you're the only one to go through it. I completely understand why it happens, and that's the majority of the work that I do, but it makes me really, really happy and inspired to see folks that come out on the other side and realize that, actually it wasn't just me and it wasn't my fault. It was not knowing the right strategies to play the game. And once you know the strategies, you're set for life. So I couldn't agree with you more.
yeah, and I think like one of the biggest takeaways I've gotten from reading like Ray Dalio, who's like a legend, right, in the world of wealth management, is like I think people like have to think long term, right? Like at the end of the day, like the markets are just gonna crash. Like it's cyclical. Like there's gonna be years where the markets like crash, but there's always no matter what happens, it will always come back up, right? And a lot
Right.
of people sell when they're scared. And then that's when you should be buying, right? It's like when there's a recession, like that's where you and then but people do the opposite because they just follow like the herd mentality. And
Hmm.
it like when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. But like trying to explain that to someone who like virtually has like who's living in survival mode, like paycheck to paycheck, they're like, dude, like I'm worried about just being able to pay rent tomorrow,
Right.
it's interesting.
Right. No, definitely. And folks feel like they're destined for a certain lifestyle. They feel like, if their parents were in a certain lifestyle, or if they find themselves in a certain lifestyle, then it's immovable. And I think part of that's what's helpful within having a coach or a friend or accountability partner to help you through it. That's person on the outside can come in and really help you realize, hey, actually, this isn't something that you're destined to do. Like, here are a few tips and tricks. Why don't we try something different and give you the confidence to branch out and take a leap of faith? And you're right. Once you get excited by not following the herd, which is, by the way, so much easier to talk about than to actually do, I have to acknowledge that.
Yeah,
But
true.
once you get excited by not following the herd, your opportunities are endless. Oh my gosh. I'm just excited for the listeners listening to this episode because I hope you guys are feeling inspired at this point. I'm like nearly cheering myself up just talking about it.
And what's inspiring for me at least is like I think I have a couple years on you, right? I'll just say like I've been I graduated from college in 2011. So I have a couple years on you, but I think it's inspiring that you're so passionate about this at your age, right? And I think to your point, because like you didn't, you know, like you do come from like an immigrant family, so maybe, you know, I think it's interesting to see how people, because I think people go through stages, right? I think what I see is like people typically later on in their lives like are much more passionate about these types of things.
Mm-hmm.
For me to meet like people that are like you and Liam's age that are so passionate about this subject and topic.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. And no, you do have quite a few years on me, Davidson. I'm sure folks that are listening to this show will like look me up on LinkedIn afterwards and see that. You know, it's actually been a theme throughout my life to date, my albeit short life to date, where I tend to get myself into situations where I am so inspired and energized by topics or people or spaces where I am just not the norm by any standard, age wise, race wise, gender wise, you know, background wise. And it's weird that it almost feels like the norm for me. So it's not a new space for me at all, but it's true. And I think it's a testament to, you know, age is really a number, and it does have a lot to do with the experiences you have in life, has a lot to do with, you know, the way that you carry yourself. But for me, I see myself as, you know, now an emerging kind of young professional, and that's the biggest identity indicator that I have in my head. And so moving forward with that, and really that alone, I just want to help the people around me. And frankly, if they're open to being vulnerable with me and I can be vulnerable with them, I think you can learn something from anyone, regardless of whether they're significantly older, significantly younger, or just, you know, from a completely different planet than you. So yes, absolutely. It's ironically a norm for me now, but an astute point, Davidson.
Well, and I feel like the BLP program, like you just meet like the most talented, just super interesting people. Like everyone that I've met, I haven't met one person that have graduated from BLP that's like just not super incredibly like talented and amazing. I'm always like, man, like you all are so brilliant.
Oh, I appreciate you. Shout out to BLP at LinkedIn. They are a recruiting team of rock stars, and I think I have to plug, you know, my short sales background. I think if there are any kind of, you know, recent grads or soon to be grads out there, a lot of that confidence, a lot of that drive, a lot of that go-getter attitude is internal, but I think that it becomes almost exacerbated or exemplified once you start to get into the business world and start to even get some sales under your belt. And I talk routinely, even as a founder and even as someone who's not in sales right now, about how incredible that experience was to really help me get my confidence and help me think about what kind of storyteller I want to be. So yeah, all that to say, if there are any listeners out there who are curious, feel free to connect with me, shoot me a message. I'd be happy to help you along the way.
Awesome. Well, I I do want to talk a little bit about your participation as a partner in ThinkTank. You know, I do think that's another um, area where there's not as much representation. Would you share a little bit more about why you decided to contribute to ThinkTank and some of the amazing work you're doing there?
Sure. Yeah. So for those that don't know, I am a partner representing the entrepreneurship pillar at a Chicago-based nonprofit called ThinkTank. The nonprofit is relatively new. It was formally founded in this summer, but we've been working on it for the past, I'd say, about year and a half with the founder and a good friend, Evan Ward, a graduate from Howard University. And our mission and vision with the think tank are really just to help to elevate that next generation of young Black professionals across their professional development, their ability to generate wealth, and their ability to pursue entrepreneurship, whether that be within their own corporate roles or as founders of startups and small business themselves. And the entire, inspiration here is to really help to close that wealth gap, to be able to help young Black excited students and professionals in this country to elevate themselves and elevate their communities as well. So with that as our background, obviously a mission that I care about very deeply. I've been involved in helping to run the entrepreneurship pillar, which helps other founders or soon to be founders with the ideation phases of their businesses,
Mm.
in kind of creating business plans and setting up business structures, in marketing and testing the voice of customer, and then finally in getting to launch, putting out an MVP, which is a minimum viable product, and really collecting customer feedback to build billion-dollar businesses. It's been an incredible ride so far, and I co-lead the entrepreneurship pillar with another good friend, Nick Fox, who's based in Chicago. And so far, I think being around founders is always something that I love to do. I would be hanging out with them regardless, but to be able to be involved at the partner level is quite humbling, as I do get to play a part in sort of steering the ship for other founders that might be in different stages along the journey.
Amazing. And you're so humble too. Like it's they have like no like arch nemesis. Like you, I don't know. You're just like such a swell human being. Like it's
Davidson, you're way too kind.
true. Like it's awesome when you meet people and you're just like, dude, like you're just freaking killing it at life, and you're super like humble about it, which is like makes it like so lovely.
I appreciate it. I think it might be that immigrant hustle we talked about. It's just I can't imagine going through life and not trying to in some way help the people that are around us. And I know everyone does that in a different capacity, but at least in this season of my life, it's like, how can I be as involved as possible? So no, I appreciate it, Davidson. And just know there are a lot of other folks like you and like me that are kind of doing that great work. So it's fantastic and energizing to chat with you as well.
Thank you. Well, last question before we go. I'm curious, like, what are some takeaways you've gotten from your podcast? Like, I know it's like a relatively um newer venture, but I'm curious. Like, it seems like you're seeing a lot of traction. It seems that you're reaching a pretty international audience too.
Yeah, definitely. So for those that haven't followed the podcast or might be hearing about it for the first time, we started in November of 2019 and just finished season 1 at the beginning of August of 2020. Reached, I think our reach might be just around 10 countries internationally and just over 40 states within the US itself. So yes, in short, Davidson could not have imagined that reach so far. And so there are a couple takeaways that I've learned, and I'll share 3 with you and your listeners today. The first is that as it relates to personal finance, it's something that we've talked about. You aren't alone. It's a living testament to be able to have conversations like these. It's a living testament to be able to have a weekly show featuring somebody new every week that's going through a personal finance struggle or sharing a win or sharing a story of growth. And so the entire goal in the podcast was to show that there is a community, and that while we do feel isolated sometimes, a lot of us are working towards the same things. So,
Hmm.
takeaway number 1 is I hope that folks out there that have listened or that are even listening to this show, which is fantastic, know that you're not alone. And there are other people out there that want to support you. I'd say the second thing is to be, as authentic as you can. So I've got like the typical Lesley giggle all the way throughout this show and all the way throughout the other show. I've got, talking about my expenditures at TJ Maxx on my show and just really being as vulnerable as possible.
Mm,
Because especially when you're in that peer-to-peer coaching space, a lot of what you're doing is building trust and building that collective understanding that you're in this together and you're not just talking to someone who might be in their 50s or 60s talking down at you, that in a very different time than when they were building their wealth. So that authenticity, I think, has really driven me quite far when it comes to Commonwealth coaching and the podcast in general. And
that's
then the last takeaway I'd give is more operational, but I think a testament to the ability to grow a team as a founder or as a passion project or side hustler, whatever you identify as. And that is that the growth of our podcast would not have been possible without our incredible intern, Kiara Lawson, who's currently a rising senior at Duke, my alma mater. And what she's been able to do with the podcast in terms of social media engagement, activity tracking, and just in general optimization has
mm,
been absolutely brilliant. We were looking for an intern in early January of this year, and I can't imagine kind of going through this without her. And so that final plug is for any of those side hustlers or, entrepreneurs out there that are thinking, okay, I got to do all this by myself. No, please find other people that are as passionate as you are and that have the skills that maybe can complement yours, because the ability to build a team makes the end product just so much better. So a slight shameless plug here, Davidson, but we are going to be looking for a new intern starting in October. So if any listeners here are curious about joining the Commonwealth coaching team, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
amazing. Well, thank you so much, Lesley. This has been a really awesome conversation. I could see, you're destined for greatness. I mean, you're already doing amazing things, but I think, there's a lot that you're offering to the world, and I love your vision and making a lot of this can be potentially complicated concepts open to the common, so that everyone, no matter what background you come from, can learn and be able to support each other. So I appreciate the work that you're doing for these communities. And yeah, thanks for coming on to my podcast.
Of course, Davidson, thanks so much for having me and for, being part of that community that's just trying to share all of the incredible nuggets throughout your network and just in career, in life, in finance. It's so inspiring to be here. So I know this won't be the last time we chat, but thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Take care.
Take care.